Hey YouTube, welcome back to Tinker with Tools. At my house right now, we are in full sports kids mode, and with the start of the NFL season, sports has been on my mind heavily. So I decided to go ahead with an idea I've had for a while to do a fantasy tool draft. So let's get right into that on Tinker with Tools. Now, if you're like me, you've probably sat down a time or two and tried to dream up what your fantasy tool lineup would look like. What tools would you own and on what platforms would they be on? Ultimately, I think it's great that we get to choose exactly what we want. But what if you had to go with a different brand of tool for each different category of tool? How was I going to maximize value when all my favorites were taken off the board? And so that idea really appealed to me. So here's what we're going to do. We've got 11 categories, 11 tool companies. Once I use a company, they are off the board and I can no longer use them. I'm going to go through each one of the categories and I'm going to talk about what I think some of the top prospects are. But ultimately, I'm going to choose one that makes the most sense for my whole tool lineup, and we'll go through each one of those. Now, obviously, what's important to me might differ from what's important to you, so feel free to play along and leave what you'd choose for each category or what you'd prioritize most down in the comments below. All right, so the first category that is going to be up is going to be that of drills. Now, for me, drills are pretty important. They are something I use rather often, but I do think we're blessed with an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the number of different drills that we have on the market today that are considered to be really nice drills. When I'm talking about the top prospects in this category, for me, you could easily name Milwaukee, Makita, Flex, DeWalt, and the list could go on with really solid choices for drills. And ultimately, as I was putting this lineup together, I decided that this category was a place where I could maybe go down to not my first or second choice in the category and still pick up a really good tool, but also find better matches for the companies I love most in another category. So in this category, I ended up going with Rigid. Now, specifically, what swayed me the most was their new high torque hammer drill, and ultimately, that tool really impressed me, and especially when you pair it with that 8 amp hour battery, the drill really comes to life. Started to feel almost like a Gen 3 Milwaukee copy. And so for those reasons, I decided that I was going to go Rigid here. I'm combining impact drivers and impact wrenches into a single category. If I was separating it out to be just impact drivers, I think the choice gets a lot more difficult because there's a lot of really good impact drivers out there. When you throw impact wrenches into it, though, I think the choice gets a little bit more difficult, and ultimately it came down to just a few companies that I was considering in this area. I was looking at DeWalt just because of how great their impact wrenches have been lately, and although I don't think their impact drivers are class leading, I think they're certainly good enough for you to be able to get the job done with them, and you have a lot of different choices to choose from to find one that fits you. So ultimately, I ended up going with Milwaukee, and I think in terms of impact drivers and wrenches, you really can't do a whole lot better than Milwaukee for this one. These are some of the best impact drivers I own. When you start talking about impact wrenches, they have so many different options for you, both on M18 and M12. The stubbies are awesome. You get up into the M18 and they have some of the more compact yet still powerful impact wrenches. And additionally, they've got that brand new high torque that I have absolutely no business owning, but that doesn't mean it sure wouldn't be fun to try it. And so for that reason, I went with Milwaukee for the impacts. The next category is going to be that of circular saws. Now I'm kind of lumping a lot here together as well because you're going to have different circular saw sizes, but then also potentially track saws. I think there's some decent options here. I think Milwaukee makes some serviceable saws. I think DeWalt has some really good powerful options. And then you have some sleepers that may not offer as complete of a lineup, but still offer a good saw like Flex and Metabo HPT. But for me, it really came down to one brand and one brand only, and that's going to be Makita. Now what I have here is the Makita XGT rear-hander circular saw, the 7 1/4, and I absolutely love it. I've got both the XGT and the LXT version that I keep meaning to do a comparison on. Overall, I definitely have my preference of which one of those I prefer more, but both of the saws are absolutely wonderful to use. They're really great and powerful, and I think are just kind of setting a good standard for what a good rear handle circular saw should be. Now, in addition to the rear handle options, They have a lot of different Sidewinder models, some bigger, some more compact. On top of that, they do have some really great track saws. The track saw was in the running for me. Had Milwaukee not finally come out with their track saw, I probably would have ended up with the Makita, either the LXT or the XGT. Ultimately, I think the versatility they have and how many different options they have just make them a really clear choice where I can get some of the most variety and value out of this pick. And so for me, it ended up with Makita for my circular saws. The next category is going to be reciprocating saws, and I've definitely had a need for these, and I have a few different options that I've used, but this is probably not going to be one of those categories to get my full attention or priority based on the work that I do. I think some of the top prospects here is clearly going to be Milwaukee as kind of the one that set the standard for what a good reciprocating saw is. Makita definitely has some good options here. I think Flex has a couple of decent options. You really can go a lot of different places. For me, ultimately, this came down to a category that I just didn't prioritize as highly, but I have heard good things from my buddy Impact Nation Tools about the Cobalt, specifically the XTR full size, and ultimately, I think they'll have enough performance to get the work done that I need, and so that's just what it came down to is priorities in this category, but go ahead and let me know what you think and what you would choose. So oscillating multi-tools is something that has been on my mind a lot recently. Last week I did a video on 12-volt oscillating multi-tools, and that definitely got me thinking about all the different options that are out there. This is another area where, although I do use one quite often, I think there are several decent choices that can get the job done for you without necessarily needing to go all the way to the greatest and the best. Now, the top leaders in this category for me are going to be Milwaukee with those new fuel options that they came out with a couple years ago. Makita, I think, does also have some decent options. And DeWalt, as I showed in that video, has one of the best blade change systems out there. Ultimately, I ended up going with one that I have not tried here as well. I ended up with Skill. When I did that video, a lot of you mentioned Skill in the comments down below saying I should have included the Skill 12 volt. I do think it has a really great light option for it, and as long as it can bring the power, I think this is an area where I was able to prioritize other companies elsewhere and still make a decent choice here going with Skill for the oscillating multi-tool. So next up is going to be the category of big saws. Specifically here, I'm talking about miter saws and table saws. Now, when you start talking about the combination of the two, that is going to take a couple of different brands out of the mix because they simply don't offer both of them in a way that I feel like is satisfactory. I think Makita has some pretty decent and enticing miter saws, but they don't have a table saw, and so for that reason, they're not going to be really in consideration here. I think when you start talking about the top players, Milwaukee is a clear choice where they do have both corded and cordless options that do seem pretty decent here. And then you have a couple more sleepers where you're looking at maybe at Bosch or Metabo or Rigid that offer decent choices for both of them. Ultimately, I decided to go with DeWalt here and ended up picking DeWalt for my big saws. Now, I currently have the DeWalt 10-inch job site table saw, and I couldn't be more happy with that. Additionally, although I don't currently own their miter saws, I have certainly considered it in the past, and if I was in a bigger area, I think I would probably end up with one of the DeWalt sliding miter saws, but because I needed something a little more compact, I went with Hitachi, now Metabo HPD at the time, for the rail forward design. You continually hear how nice the DeWalt miter saws are. The table saws are awesome. They offer both corded and cordless versions. So for me, this was a great place to slot DeWalt in, get a lot of really great tool for my pick, and I think that was the right choice there. Sanders are going to be something for me that if you have a really big sanding job, I think the choice is still going to be going with a corded option since it just gives you the power and long run time that you need. But occasionally you are going to need a cordless sander. So I think picking a brand that gives you a good combination of the two is the way to go here. And ultimately this is where I ended up putting Bosch. I really do feel like they are the top pick when it comes to cordless sanders that you're going to be picking from these lists. Obviously, there's some more premium brands that aren't included in the selections tonight. I think both with 12 and 18 volt, Bosch offers the best cordless sanders of the tool companies we're considering today, and they are really just nice to use. They're ergonomic, and I think they work really well. They're very smooth, and I think they handle the vibration of sanding very well, and that makes it comfortable to use for longer durations. When you move over to the corded side, I've used a corded 5-inch random orbit sander, and then if you need something more powerful that's just going to remove a lot of material, their $300 6-inch random orbit sander with those different types of removal methods is going to be just a really nice one. And so for that reason, I really do think Bosch is the great pick here. But let me know if you feel differently, if you feel there's another company that deserves my consideration for sanders. All right, so now the next category is going to be the SDS Hammer Drill. That is an area where I unfortunately just don't have a lot of experience. So I didn't place a high priority here, but if you do a lot more work, you might put more emphasis on here. So for that reason, I went with Craftsman here. It's not a pick I'm excited about. I picked it here, and I guess I'm just hoping that some of that DeWalt magic kind of trickles down the Stanley Black & Decker pipeline and lands into an SDS tool and makes it something that can get the job done for me for the limited amount of work that I need. Obviously, some of the major players you're going to be looking at here are going to be Bosch, Makita, Flex, DeWalt, Milwaukee. They all make great SDS tools, and I think you can get some really nice ones out there. And so if you're doing a lot of work, I would probably expect you to pick differently from me. But for trying to play in these rules, that's where I ended up with Craftsman. Now, nail guns is one that I actually end up using quite a bit. Predominantly, I have mostly either Milwaukee or DeWalt nail guns. I've used both and I like both, but Milwaukee definitely feels like the more premium option here. Now, I've already taken Milwaukee off the board elsewhere, and so for that reason, I actually went with Metabo HPT. Picking Metabo HPT for just about any of these categories, I don't think is going to be something that's going to be viewed as the most glamorous pick. But when it comes to nailers, they've got a sneaky good lineup, in my opinion, where they've got some really nice tools, and they've been doing it for quite some time. They recently refreshed their Brad nailer, got a lot smaller, a lot more compact. They do have a wide variety of nailers, and they've got the framing nailer. They even have a duplex. It's nice to know that they've got a wide variety of options, and nail guns is something Metabo HPT does really well. So for that reason, they get my pick here. All right, we're down to our last two categories. Now, the first one that I'm going to be going through is going to be that of tool storage. Now, I think we all know who is going to be the predominant leader or the top prospect in that, and that's going to be Milwaukee. For me, even though Milwaukee is going to be my top pick, I felt like they perhaps would have a bigger impact elsewhere in my lineup, and so for that reason, I started looking elsewhere. But ultimately, I went with the one that had the most sincere version of flattery by copying just about everything they do, and I end up with Flex at this pick. Now, I think Flex could end up in a lot of different areas, and although it hasn't caught on as much as maybe some of the early reviews would have indicated maybe it should have, I do think they've got some decent options there, and just this week we're starting to see round 2 of those options coming out with more drawers and different systems. I do think the Flex Stack Pack is going to meet my needs and is going to give me a lot of what Milwaukee can do, and although it might not be quite as nice or flushed out, it's still going to get the job done for me. All right, last but not least, I am picking the category of lighting. Now, lighting is something that every tool company has a light. But when you think about the top prospects in lighting, I think obviously Milwaukee comes to mind. DeWalt has a really flushed out lineup. I ultimately ended up going with Ryobi here. I was surprised when I started looking through their lighting options to see if this could actually be my pick, that they do have a lot of different versions. This exercise is going to make you cut corners somewhere, and I'm by no means saying that Ryobi offers the best lighting on the market, but I felt they had a lot of different options, and so for a late round pick, if you will, they definitely had enough of what I wanted for me to put Ryobi here. All right, so there is my fantasy tool draft. The rules are arbitrary, they're made up. Obviously, this is more just a fun challenge to try and maximize what you can do by playing within those rules and seeing where you're going to come up with perhaps the best value. Am I guaranteeing that I have the best picks here? No. I do want to hear from you. I want to hear what you would do, and I love to hear what you think are the best tool options because your opinions influence what I do as well. If you have any questions about anything I mentioned, go ahead and leave it down below as well. If you like the video, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Thanks as always for the support, and until next time, I'll catch you on Tinker with Tools.